Hi everybody, I'm Bailey and I'm a co-founder and CTO of Pop-Up Archive. And our mission here is to make audio searchable. So we have two different main products. Pop-Up Archive came first, and it's used more for libraries and archives and in newsrooms. Journalists can come, for instance, take an audio file, drag and drop it into the interface, and we'll create an automatic transcript. And you can get the output for that and then edit it there in the site. We have team dashboards, interactive editor, and also a kind of underused but available embeddable player. And more recently, we took the technology that we used to create Pop-Up Archive and we created a secondary product called Audio Search. And Audio Search, so I think of Pop-Up Archive more as a push model. People come to us with content, whether that's like a big archive that like gives us a huge like CSV or uses our API to import tons and tons of content. That's all you bringing content to us. We wanted to play more with the speech to text we were getting back and see what we could do with everything that we were extracting from the audio. So we made Audio Search. And that is a full text podcast search API. So we have tons and tons of podcasts that we're importing on a regular basis. We're transcribing, at this point, just a subset of them as we work on scaling, and making that all available through an API and doing cool stuff with it, like extracting entities and keywords and doing topic clustering. So this here is Pop-Up Archive. So this is just an example of what you would get if you like dragged and dropped a file in. We have a transcript, there's timestamps, there's these M1 and M2 as speaker changes, and each of the segments are broken by that, and you can like move in here and work in it ideally just like any normal text editor, and we do some math on the back end and try to come up with new time alignments based on the edits you've made. And with that, you can like click that export button over there and get out different transcript formats. You can download your file. You can get an SRT. I think we have WebVTT, text, with different like timestamps available. And you can also, if you choose to make your file public, back it up at the Internet Archive. And here's where we use some entity extraction software to create entities for that as well. But since there's like a lot of editor stuff going on here, I thought I would talk a little bit more about Audio Search and make that the main focus of what I'm going to talk to you about. So just like Pop-Up Archive, we've got our timestamp transcripts. We moved away for Pop-Up Archive, we used OpenCollet for our entity extraction, and for Audio Search, we decided that we wanted a little more customization. So we've trained our own entity extraction, and I think that's built on top of a toolkit called Spacey, and I have a list of our open source resources here at the end of the talk, so you'll be able to see that then. For topic clustering, we've been doing some machine learning to sort of take all of the podcasts that we have and all of the text and try to put them in unsupervised trained buckets that we then labeled. So as new podcasts come in, we try to guess what it's about. And I have some examples of that later too. And cultural analysis is the last big thing that we're doing. And we go out on the internet and see what people are saying about podcasts. And we try to like save all that text. And it helps you know, do people love this podcast? Is this something they're talking about? If I was a first time listener of this podcast, what episode should I start with? And so what we can do with that here, but mostly it's improved search and discovery, and like our main goal for this tool is we just like really like podcasts, and our goal has always been get more people listening to podcasts. And so every time we build a new feature, we think about, will this bring more people to the podcast table? That's sort of repeating what I just said to you, so I'm going to skip over to here is some visualizations of this in our app. Now, the app, you can go to Audio Search right now. It's audio, SEAR.ch, which has been complicated to explain to people, but that's the web address. It's mostly meant to be an API, and we're trying to get developers there so you can build all sorts of interesting things with it. But we also wanted to make sure that you could get an idea of what it does, and so we've also implemented search features. So right for this, we knew we wanted that Vulture had an episode about Twin Peaks, but we couldn't remember what it was called. So we searched Vulture Twin Peaks, and we get all of these episodes back, and you see these two have Twin Peaks in the title, but this third one does not mention Twin Peaks in the title, and I believe also not in the description, but we found it here as search results in the text. And so we click through onto that episode, and we search for Twin Peaks in the actual transcript, and we can find all of those moments, and we can also make little clips of it. Oh, this is the search results example. So let's say you wanted to get that clip about Twin Peaks and clip it and then put it on Twitter. This is what that would look like. And this was actually inspired by Al Jazeera's really good work with getting audio and video onto their Facebook feed. Because as you've noticed, if you're scrolling through Facebook, if you're scrolling through Twitter, it's not allowed for you to play audio or video with the volume up. So to work around that, audio doesn't have anything to engage you. Maybe you can put a picture up, but that's really it. So we show the timestamp transcripts as they are played, and this is kind of in beta, so it still doesn't look super slick. But I think that it could be a compelling way to get people from Twitter or from Facebook back to the Full Links podcast. We also wanted to help people filter all the podcasts that they're getting back in our search results. So, like I said before, how do you know that this is one of the best podcasts you could listen to? There are tons and tons of podcasts. I think the last I checked, and it's hard to be certain about this, but there were several 100,000 podcasts that had posted something, I believe, within the last 6 months. So that's too many for you to listen to. So what can we do with that? We try to use the data available to us, kind of tertiary data around the web, to tell you what to look for. So these have really high buzz scores on our site, and these are all actually very good episodes, I can attest. And we use different data points to come up with these scores. Some chart data, some number of ratings, how many people have talked about this, and finally, can we find anything in social media or in the news or newsletters where people are actively discussing this podcast? Here's some just D3 visualizations of what we are getting with our topic clusters, and I think this really helps illustrate what the topic clustering is all about. So we got all of this untrained information and unlabeled data from our topic clustering, and from that we get a list of words. For colloquial, we saw words like, oh yeah, and we decided that was probably kind of a casual, chatty podcast and less of a super curated NPRS type podcast. So we named that label colloquial. News and politics, we saw more words that, would relate to the everyday news cycle. And then if we compare those two things, we have a lot of things that podcasts that are discarded. But if we say, what's the most colloquial of all of the news, we get something like candidate confessional, defeated politicians tell all, and that's probably a pretty good guess. That's probably actually accurate for that podcast. Here we got not safe for work. You can imagine what those terms were, and relationships, things like love, dating, etc. And the most not safe for work of the relationship podcast is something called Swipe Night, which I assume is something about Tinder. So probably also accurate. And these are just a list of some example API methods. Here, so I'm running a little bit over, so I'm going to speed through. We're using a bunch of open source components to make all this stuff work. In particular, I think for the machine learning stuff we're doing, this NLP line is most interesting. A lot of this is just queuing and boring stuff like data storage. And this is what we've got coming for the future. Right now we're running some experiments to see if we can get more genre and mood sort of labels for our podcast. Like, this is funny, this is contemplative, and we're also trying to get chapterization so that we can say this segment is about, or this segment begins and ends here and is about, ultimately, is what we want to do. And I would say we've been talking a lot about what are the impediments to making this stuff happen. Training data is a huge impediment. So if anyone has ideas about training data, creating experiments, absolutely talk to me. Here's how you may get in touch with me, or follow Pop-Up Archive or Audio Search. And finally, I have API demo stuff that I'm just gonna leave here for you. You can go sign up at Audio Search and get a developer account and click on this and see all the good JSON that you can get when you search Audio Search. And that's all for me. Any questions? Cool.